Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our amazing event that we're bringing to you tonight, Terrifying Tales. Before we get started, first, I'd like to thank the members of both the Root Mechanicals and the Tuscaloosa Writers and Illustrators Guild. We came together pretty much last minute to get this program done, but we're pretty excited about it. We have a lot of great performances for you today, ranging from Edgar Allan Poe to Neil Gaiman and everything in between. So I know you're tired of seeing me, so we'll just hop right into it. And our first performer is Stephanie Shamblin, and I'll bring her on screen and introduce her. Stephanie, how are you doing today?
Good, Ron. How are you doing?
Doing great. So what will you be performing for us today?
Well, I'm going to kick this off with a classic, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Just, a good fright fest.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to start this. So what I'll do now, I'll back off and I'll let you get started.
Thank you. True, I'm nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. Listen and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It's impossible to say how first the idea came into my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, very cautiously. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed. So it was impossible to go about the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by his name in a hearty tone, inquiring about how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious when opening the door, and never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with the thick darkness, so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, so I kept pushing it in steadily and steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed and crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well, and I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he'd been lying awake ever since that first slight noise, saying to himself, "It was nothing but the wind in the chimney. It was a mouse crossing the floor, or it was a cricket which has made a terrifying chirp." Yes, he was trying to comfort himself with all of these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open little by little a crevice in the lantern. So I opened it until at length a single dim ray, like a thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious. As I gazed upon it, I saw with perfect distinctiveness all the dull blue and the hideous veil over it that had chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now, have I not told you, what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses. Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. And now, the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come, and with a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once, and once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. And then I smiled gaily to find the deed was so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on and with muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. And at length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. When I had made an end to these labors, it was 4 o'clock and still dark as night. As the bells sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down and opened it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been roused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was mine own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officer was satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat, and still they chatted. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued to gain more definitiveness until, at length, I found the sound was not within my ears. No doubt now I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. What could I do? I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy stride, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder and louder, then louder. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, louder, louder, louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble me no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart.
That was amazing. Thank you, Stephanie. So if you enjoyed that, we have another great story coming for you next. Patricia, how's it going?
Spooky.
And what will you be performing for us today?
I have a piece by Richard Matheson. His most famous work is I Am Legend, but the story I'm reading is another one he wrote called Dress of White Silk.
All right, take it away.
Quiet is here, and all in me. Grandma locked me in my room and won't let me out. Because it's happened, she says. I guess I was bad, only it was the dress. Mama's dress, I mean. She's gone away forever. Grandma says your mama is in heaven. I don't know how. Can she go in heaven if she's dead? Now I hear Grandma. She's in Mama's room. She's putting Mama's dress down the box. Why does she always? And locks it too. I wish she didn't. It's a pretty dress and smells sweet so. And warm. I love to touch it against my cheek, but I can't never again. I guess that's why Grandma is mad at me, but I am sure. All day it was only like every day. Mary Jane came over to my house. She lives across the street. Every day she comes to my house and play. Today she was. I have 7 dolls and a fire truck. Today Grandma said, play with your dolls in it. Don't you go inside your mama's room now, she said. She always says it. She just means not mess up, I think. Because she says it all the time. Don't go in your mama's room. Like that. But it's nice in Mama's room. When it rains, I go there. Or when Grandma is doing her nap, I do. I don't make noise. I just sit on the bed and touch the white cover, like when I was only small. The room smells like sweet. I make believe Mama is dressing, and I'm allowed in. I smell her white silk dress, her going out for night dress. She called it that. I don't remember when. I hear it moving if I listen hard. I make believe to see her sitting at the dressing table, like touching on perfume or something, I mean. And see her dark eyes. I can remember. It's so nice if it rains and I see eyes on the window. The rain sounds like a big giant outside. He says, shush, shush, so everyone will be quiet. I like to make believe that in Mama's room. What I like almost best is to sit at Mama's dressing table. It's like pink and big, it smells sweet too. The seat in front has a pillow sewed on it. There are bottles and bottles with bumps and have colored perfume in them. And you can see almost your whole self in the mirror. When I sit there, I make believe to be Mama. I say, be quiet, Mother, I am going out and you cannot stop me. It's something I say. I don't know why, like I hear it in me. And, oh, stop your sobbing, Mother. They will not catch me. I had my magic dress. When I pretend, I brush my hair long, but I only use my own brush from my room. I didn't never use Mama's brush. I don't think Grandma is mad at me for that because I never use Mama's brush. I wouldn't never. Sometimes I did open the box up because I know where Grandma puts the key. I saw her once when she wouldn't know I saw her. She puts the key on the hook in Mama's closet. Behind the door, I mean. I could open the box lots of times. That's because I like to look at Mama's dress. I like best to look at it. It's so pretty and feels soft and like silky. I could touch it for a million years. I kneel on the rug with roses on it. I hold the dress in my arms and like breathe from it. I touch it against my cheek. I wish I could take it to sleep with me and hold it. I like to. No, I can't, because Grandma says. And she says, I should burn it up, but I loved her so. And she cries about the dress. I wasn't never bad with it. I put it back neat like it was never even touched. Grandma never knew. I laughed that she never knew before, but she knows now I did it, I guess, and she'll punish me. What did it hurt her? Wasn't it my Mama's dress? What I like real best in Mama's room is look at the picture of Mama. It has a gold thing around it. Frame is what Grandma says. It's on the wall on top of the bureau. Mama is pretty. Your Mama was pretty, Grandma says. Why does she? I see Mama there smiling on me, and she is pretty. For always. Her hair is black, like mine. Her eyes are even pretty like black. Her mouth is red, so red. I like the dress, and it's the white one. It's all down on her shoulders. Her skin is white, almost white like the dress, and so are her hands. She is so pretty. I love her even if she is gone away forever. I love her so much. I guess that's what made me bad. I mean, to Mary Jane. Mary Jane came from lunch like she does. Grandma went to do her nap. She said, "Don't forget now, no going in your mama's room." I told her, "No, Grandma." And I was saying the truth, but then Mary Jane and I was playing fire truck. Mary Jane said, "I bet you haven't, no, Mother. I bet you made up it all," she said. I got mad at her. "I have a mama, I know." She made me mad at her to say I made up it all. She said I'm a liar. I mean about the bed and the dressing table and the picture and the dress and everything. I said, "Well, I'll show you, smarty." I looked into Grandma's room. She was doing her nap still. I went down and said Mary Jane to come on because Grandma won't know. She wasn't so smart after then. She giggled like she does. Even she made a scaredy noise when she hit into the table in the hall upstairs. I said, "You're a scaredy cat," to her. She said back, "Well, my house isn't so dark like this." Like that was so much. I looked in. We went in Mama's room. It was more dark than you could see. I said, "This is my Mama's room. I suppose I made up it all." She was by the door, and she wasn't smart then either. She didn't say any word. She looked around the room. She jumped when I got her arm. "Well, come on," I said. I sat on the bed and said, "This is my Mama's bed. See how soft it is?" She didn't say nothing. "Scaredy cat," I said. "Am not," she said like she does. I said to sit down. How can you tell if it's soft if you don't sit down? She sat down by me. I said, "Feel how soft it is. Smell how sweet it is." I closed my eyes, but funny, it wasn't like always. Because Mary Jane was there. I told her to stop feeling the cover. "You said to," she said. "Well, stop it," I said. "See," I said, and I pulled her up. "That's the dressing table." I took her and brought her there. She said, "Let go." It was so quiet and like always. I started to feel bad. Because Mary Jane was there. Because it was in my Mama's room, and Mama wouldn't like Mary Jane there. But I had to show her the things because. I showed her the mirror. We looked at each other in it. She looked white. "Mary Jane is a scaredy cat," I said. Am not," she said. "Anyway, nobody's house is so quiet and dark inside." "Anyway," she said, "it smells." I got mad at her. "No, it doesn't smell," I said. "Does show so," she said. "You said it did." I got madder too. "It smells like sugar," she said. "It smells like sick people in your Mama's room." "Don't say my Mama's room is like sick people," I said to her. "Well, you didn't show me no dress, and you're lying," she said. "There isn't no dress." I felt all warm inside, so I pulled her hair. "I'll show you," I said. "You're going to see my Mama's dress, and you'll better not call me a liar." I made her stand still, and I got the key off the hook. I kneeled down. I opened the box with the key. Mary Jane said, "Phew, that smells like garbage." I put my nails in her, and she pulled away and got mad. "Don't you pinch me," she said, and she was all red. "I'm telling my mother on you," she said. "And anyway, it's not a white dress. It's dirty and ugly," she said. "It's not dirty," I said. I said it so loud, I wonder why Grandma didn't hear. I pulled out the dress from the box. I held it up to show her how it's white. It fell open like the rain whispering, and the bottom touched on the rug. "It is too white," I said, "all white and clean and silky." "No," she said. She was so mad and red. "It has a hole in it." I got more madder. "If my Mama was here, she'd show you," I said. "You've got no Mama," she said, all ugly. "I hate her." "I have." I said it way loud. I pointed my finger to Mama's picture. "Well, who can see in this stupid dark room?" she said. I pushed her hard, and she hit against the bureau. "See then," I said mean. "Look at the picture. That's my Mama, and she's the most beautiful lady in the world." "She's ugly. She has funny hands," Mary Jane said. "She hasn't," I said. "She's the most beautiful lady in the world." Not," she said. "She has buck teeth." I don't remember then. I think the dress moved in my arms. Mary Jane screamed. I don't remember what. It got dark, and the curtains were closed. I think I couldn't see anyway. I couldn't hear nothing except buck teeth, funny hands, buck teeth, funny hands, even when no one was saying it. There was something else because I think I heard someone call, "Don't let her say that." I couldn't hold to the dress, and I had it on me, I can't remember, because I was grown up strong. But I was a little girl still. I mean outside. I think I was terrible bad then. Grandma took me away from there, I guess. I don't know. She was screaming, "God help us, it's happened," over and over. I don't know why. She pulled me all the way here to my room and locked me in. She won't let me out. Well, I'm not so scared. Who cares if she locks me in a million billion years? She doesn't even have to give me supper. I'm not hungry anyway. I'm full. Happy Halloween.
Thank you for that, Patricia. That's my first time hearing that story, and I I am disturbed. So thank you. Thank you for a great performance, and we'll see you later. All right, so that was Patricia Correll, and now we have Wes. And Wes is going to perform a story that you may be familiar with if you're from Alabama. Wes, what are you going to be reading for us today?
I'm going to be reading The Face in the Courthouse Window, as told by my favorite storyteller in the whole world, Kathryn Tucker Windham.
All right, I'll let you do your.
Since 1878, there has been the picture of a man's face so indelibly stamped on a window of the Pickens County Courthouse that it looks as if a photographer had snapped his lens and made the likeness on the glass pane. But it was no human photographer who reproduced that countenance, which reflects the anguish and terror filling the heart of a man who knew that he was face to face with violent death. The courthouse in Carrollton was burned to the ground on Thursday morning, November 16th, 1876. Fire broke out in several places at the same time, and for this reason, the blaze was held unquestionably to be the work of an incendiary. The burning of the courthouse unleashed an emotional torrent that swept away both patience and reason. The courthouse was more to the residents than just a seat of the county government. It was a symbol of their defiance of the Yankee authority, sturdy evidence of their determination to overcome defeat. The original courthouse had been burned by Yankee troops under the command of General John T. Croxton on April 5th, 1865. It was a senseless burning, serving no military purpose, and it infuriated and embittered the residents of the county. In those days following the Civil War, the task of rebuilding the courthouse seemed impossible. There was no money. Materials were scarce and expensive. Skilled labor was difficult to find. Yet, somehow, the courthouse was rebuilt. Even the occupying federal troops who were camped in Carrollton during the post-war years must have been impressed by the achievement. To the citizens whose work and sacrifice had rebuilt the courthouse, the building represented a restoration of law and order. It was important to their sense of stability as well as to their pride. Then, less than 12 years after their first courthouse was burned by the Yankees, the residents of Carrollton watched helplessly as their second courthouse, the one they had struggled so hard to rebuild, was consumed by fire. It was almost more than they could bear. As time went on, and nobody was able to point the finger of justice at any suspect, the citizens of Carrollton became uneasy and began to criticize the officers of the law for not finding the criminal. They demanded that the sheriff produce the person who had burned the courthouse so that they could sleep easy in their beds at night without waking frequently to see if they smelled something burning. The sheriff realized he must find a suspect if he possibly could. Henry Wells was a Negro who lived near the town. Had a bad name. His temper was high, and he had been involved in several fights. It was rumored that he always carried a razor. Nobody really saw him set fire to the courthouse, but he had been in town earlier in the morning when the fire occurred, and rumors connecting him with the burning began to be circulated, especially when no other suspect could be located. In spite of the fact that there was only vague circumstantial evidence against him, Wells was arrested on 4 counts: arson, burglary, carrying a concealed weapon, and assault with intent to murder. Wells swore that he was not guilty and was being wrongly accused, but in a group of men gathered about the square on a sultry afternoon, his arrest feeling against him ran high, and with the aid of some corn whiskey, it ran higher until it reached a dangerous pitch. The air on that afternoon was oppressively humid, and a black, ragged cloud west of town, the rumbling of thunder, lent an additional menace to the already ominous situation. Men began milling about, demanding immediate action against Wells. Soon, someone produced a rope, and hasty plans for hanging him at once were made. In an effort to save him from the excited crowd, the sheriff hid Wells in the garret of the new courthouse. But his whereabouts were soon discovered, and bent on vengeance, the angry horde closed in on the courthouse, ready to break down its doors if necessary to reach their prey. Wells knew why they were there. He went to the garret window, his face gray with fear, and confronted them, defiantly shouting at the top of his lungs, "I am innocent. If you kill me, I'm going to haunt you for the rest of your lives." And as later events proved, he did. Just as the bloodthirsty crowd was about to get into the building, a bolt of lightning illuminated Wells' tortured face behind the window pane. The hot, close atmosphere of the afternoon had been the prelude to a short but severe thunderstorm, and Wells' picture, caught by the lightning, they say, has remained imprinted on the garret window of the Carrollton Courthouse from that day to this. Accounts vary as to how Wells actually met his death. As one story has it, the lightning killed him. Then, sobered by this event, the crowd dispersed, satisfied that the Almighty had meted out just punishment to a criminal. Another version of the tale is that the lightning flash alarmed the mob, but not enough to stop them from hanging their victim. At any rate, everyone agrees that this was the last night of Henry Wells' life. The next morning, a calm day after the tumultuous night, a member of the lynching party was passing the courthouse. He glanced up at the window where he had seen Wells looking out the night before, and he turned pale with fright. He rubbed his eyes and, silently cursing the corn whiskey he had drunk the night before, he looked again. And again he saw the face of Henry Wells peering down at him. He knew that Wells was dead, and he began to scream that the devil had come to haunt him. His screams brought other people to the scene, and they too saw the face of Henry Wells, distorted by fear, but an unmistakable likeness, looking down at them. The face was still there the next day, and the next, and the next. Hundreds of people came to gaze in awe and disbelief at the eerie likeness. The sheriff was particularly upset by the accusing face. He was often seen carrying buckets of water up the steep stairs to try and wash away the symbol of a town's guilt. But he only succeeded in making the picture more clearly defined. No amount of scrubbing, not even with gasoline, would remove the image from the window pane. It's still there, plainly visible on the lower right-hand pane of the garret window. On at least one occasion, some people say two, every window pane in the Carrollton Courthouse was broken during a severe hailstorm, except the pane with the image of Henry Wells on it. And on stormy nights, some people swear they can hear wails coming from the twisted mouth of the face in the courthouse window. Thank you.
Wes, thanks for reading that classic for us. That was a great performance. So up next, we have someone who is going to make quite the introduction. So without further ado, we'll bring on TK.
I know a story about a little boy named Drew. Drew is afraid of everything. He's afraid of great big dogs, little squeaky mice, loud thunder, bright lightning, and fast, noisy cars that go past his house in the night. But the thing he is the most afraid of is the dark. Now, the worst place for the dark is in the path between his grandmother's house and his. The path isn't that long, but there is a canopy of trees over the path that make it, even in the darkest, brightest afternoon, it's dark there. If Dirk's with someone, it's okay. But if he has to walk alone, he starts thinking about a movie he saw not long ago with his cousins, and the little girl, and the wizard, and me. And his brain starts thinking lions and tigers and bears, oh my! Lions and tigers and bears, oh my! And he quietly turns around and runs back to his house. He cannot go through that dark place alone. Well, the worst part of being afraid of the dark happened last week when he was at his birthday party. All of his cousins were there, his aunts, his uncles, all of his friends, except for his grandmother, who was a little bit sick, and she was over there on the front porch where she always sat. When everyone had eaten, before they had cake and ice cream, Dirk asked if he could take a plate over to Grandma, and his mother thought that was a great idea. So she made him a plate and covered it, and he took it proudly in his hands, and he marched down that path with all his cousins behind him until he got to her grandma. She gave him the plate and kissed her on the cheek, and all of her other cousins sat down, and they chatted and talked and waited, and no one noticed how dark it was getting as the sun started to set. Until Dirk's mother yelled, "Anybody wants cake? Better get back here." Well, of course, all the children jumped up and started running for the path, and so did Dirk. But Granny stopped him. And she said, "Wait a minute, honey. Give us a little kiss right here, just one little birthday kiss." And Dirk said, "Gram, I gotta go. I've gotta go." "Oh, just one little kiss, just one, somewhere, little kiss." So he kissed his grandmother, jerked his hand away from her, and raced down to the path. But he was too late. He could hear them all on the other side of the path. They were laughing and singing and talking and saying, "Hurry up, Dirk, we want cake." And so Dirk said, "I'm 9 years old now. I can walk this path by myself." And he started walking towards the dark spot. And his brain started thinking, lions, and tigers and bears. Oh my, lions and tigers. But there were no such thing, and he knew that. And then he thought, what else might be in the dark that could get him? And he got so scared he put his hands over his eyes and he sat down on his heels and tried not to cry. Pretty soon he heard a noise in front of him, and he put his hands down and looked, and there was his cousin John, the big bully, the one who loved to torment him so much. He put his hands on his hips and he looked down at Darque and he said, I found Darque the jerk. He's sitting here in the dirt crying like a baby. I'll get him there. So John reached down, picked Darque up, and threw him over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes. He carried him to the birthday party and put him down and took a bow. Of course, everyone laughed at John. Well, Darque thought they were laughing at him. So he went upstairs to his room and he refused to come out for the rest of the day. He sat there feeling bad and horrible, and he remembered a story his Uncle Robert had told him. A week before Halloween every year, there was a place up in the graveyard that was on the other side of their house where there was a lone coffin, and the coffin would come up out of the ground and it would open up and it would walk around looking for its own body. And if there was anyone there in the graveyard, it would swallow them up and they'd never be seen again. Well, Darque thought, if I can go down there and sit in that graveyard and wait and see that coffin, that'll make me braver than even John, who went ahead and screamed at the end of the story when Uncle Robert told it. So he got up, got dressed, grabbed his jacket, grabbed his reading flashlight, and went downstairs. He wrote a note to his mom that said, I'm going to go sleep in the graveyard. I'll be back in the morning. Don't worry about me. Then he slipped out the back door. As luck would have it, there was enough light that he didn't even need to turn the flashlight on. No loud dogs were barking at him. So he got up and walked down this path toward the graveyard. And he decided he was not going to be afraid. And when his brain started thinking lions and tigers and bears, he said, no such thing. There's no such thing. And he marched to that, no such thing, no such thing, until he got to the graveyard fence. And he opened the gate. There were a lot of gravestones in that little graveyard. But there was only one way up in the corner all by itself. That was it. Darque wandered through the stones until he got to a tree that was very close to the grave. The dirt was undisturbed. Everything was clean and just like always. So Darque put his jacket on the ground next to the tree and went to sit down. But when he rubbed on the jacket, he felt something in the pocket. And that's when he found an old box of cough drops. And he thought, great, now I'll have something to eat if I get hungry. And he sat down on his jacket and he leaned up against the tree and he tried not to fall asleep. He really tried not to fall asleep, but he couldn't. His eyes got heavy and his head drifted against the tree. And then he heard a noise. And when he opened his eyes, he wished he hadn't opened his eyes, because the coffin had come all the way up out of the grave and it was standing there and it was looking at him, and the lid started to squeak open. Darque was scared to death. He stood up and he grabbed his jacket and his flashlight and he thought, oh no, and he took a step back, but the tree was there. It stopped him from going. What am I going to do? He said. Well, he took his jacket. Maybe if he threw the jacket at the coffin, it would fall and he could get away. So he reared back and he threw that jacket as hard as he could. Nothing. It kept on coming right at him, and now the door was opening. Squeak! Darque was so scared. He picked up his flashlight and he said, maybe this will knock it over. And he reared back and he threw that flashlight up, and he heard it thunk against the coffin. Nothing! It was still coming right at him. Darque did not want to see what was in there. He had to get away, but he didn't know what to do. All he had left was his cough drops. And he looked at the cough drops, and looked at the coffin, and looked at the cough drops, and thought, well, why not? He pitched his arm back, and he went to throw the cough drops at the coffin, and phoop! The coffin disappeared. It was gone. You know why? Because cough drops stop coughing.
So that was TK, and she really went all out with the performance and the costume. So once again, great performance, TK. Next, we have Exa, and I will bring her on. So Exa, what will you be performing for us today?
Tonight I will be reading The Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
All right.
The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a fall summer day. The people of the village began to gather in the square around 10 o'clock. In this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. The children assembled first. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and the roundest stones. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders that rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their elder brothers or sisters. Soon the men began to gather, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together away from the pile of stones in the corner. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon they began to call their children, and the children came reluctantly. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's gasping hand and, laughing, ran back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his older brother. The lottery was conducted by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square carrying the little wooden box, he waved and called, "Little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a three-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance. And when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellas want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before two men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset tradition. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the old box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny. But now that the population was more than 300 people and likely to keep growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. At one time, some people remembered, there had been a recital of some sort performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. There had also been a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box. But this had also changed with time. Just as Mr. Summers finally turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchison came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. Clean forgot what day it was, she said to Mrs. Delacroix, and they both laughed softly. Thought my old man was out back stacking wood, Mrs. Hutchison went on. And then I looked out the window and the kids was gone, and then I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running. She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, You're in time, though. They're still talking up there. Mrs. Hutchison began to make her way through the crowd. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 people said in voices just loud enough to be heard, Here comes your Mrs. Hutchison. And Bill, she made it after all. Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie. You wouldn't have me leave the dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe? And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchison's arrival. Well, now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess we better get started. Get this over with so we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here? Dunbar, said several people. Dunbar. Mr. Summers consulted his list. Clyde Dunbar, he said. Oh, that's right. He broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him? Me, I guess, said a woman. And Mr. Summers turned to look at her. Wife draws for her husband, Mr. Summers said. Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie? Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. Horace is not but 16 yet, Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. Right, Mr. Summers said. Then he asked, Watson boy drawing this year? A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. Here, he said. I'm drawing for my mother and me. He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said things like, Good fellow, and glad to see your mother's got a man to do it. Well, Mr. Summers said, Guess that's everyone. Old man Warner make it? Here, a voice said. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat and looked at the list. All ready? He called. Now I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear? Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, Adams? A man disengaged himself from the crowd and came forward. Hi, Steve, Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, Hi, Joe. They grinned at one another humorlessly and nervously. Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner as he turned and went hastily back to his place in the crowd, when he stood there for a little while apart from his family, not looking down at his hand. Allan? Anderson? Bentham? Seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore, Mrs. Delacroix said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. Seems like we got through with the last one just only last week. Time sure goes fast, Miss Graves said. Clark, Delacroix. There goes my old man, said Mrs. Delacroix. She held her breath while her husband went forward. Dunbar, Mr. Summers said, and Mrs. Dunbar went steadily to the box, while one of the women said, Go on, Janie, and another said, There she goes. We're next, Mrs. Graves said. She watched while Mr. Graves came from around the side of the box, greeted Mr. Summers gravely, and selected a slip of paper from the box. Harbert, Hutchison, get up there, Bill, Mrs. Hutchison said, and the people near her laughed. Jones, they do say, Mr. Adams said to old man Warner, who stood next to him, that over in the North Village, they're talking of giving up the lottery. Old man Warner snorted. Pack of crazy fools, he said, listening to the young folks. Nothing's good enough for them. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery, he added petulantly. Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking around with everybody. Some places have already quit lotteries, Mrs. Adams said. Nothing but trouble in that, old man Warner said stoutly. Pack of young fools. Martin, Overdyke, Percy. I wish they'd hurry, Mrs. Dunbar said to her oldest son. They're almost through, her son said. You get ready to run tell Dad, Mrs. Dunbar said. Mr. Summers called his own name and stepped forward precisely and selected a slip of paper from the box. Then he called, Warner. 77th year I've been in the lottery, old man Warner said as he went through the crowd. 77th time. Watson. The tall boy came awkwardly from the crowd. Someone said, Don't be nervous, Jack. And Mr. Summers said, Take your time, son. Zanini. After that, there was a long pause, a long, breathless pause, until Mr. Summers said, All right, fellas. For a minute, no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly, all the women began to speak at once, saying, Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons? Then the voices began to say, It's Hutchison. It's Bill. Bill Hutchison's got it. Go tell your father, Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. People began to look around to see the Hutchisons. Bill Hutchison was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchison shouted to Mr. Summers, You didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair. Be a good sport, Tessie, Mrs. Delacroix called, and Mrs. Graves said, All of us took the same chance. Shut up, Tessie, Bill Hutchison said. Well, everyone, Mr. Summers said, that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be in a hurry a little bit more to get done in time. He consulted his next list. Bill, he said, you draw for the Hutchison family. You got any other households in the Hutchisons? There's Dawn and Eva, Mrs. Hutchison yelled. Make them take their chance. Daughters draw with their husbands' families, Tessie, Mr. Summers said gently. You know that all as well as everyone else does. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. I guess not, Joe, Bill Hutchison said regretfully. My daughter draws with her husband's family. That's only fair, and I've got no other family except the kids. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchison said. There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave and Tessie and me. All right then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you got their tickets back. Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box then, Mr. Summers directed. Take Bill's and put it in. I think we ought to start over, Mrs. Hutchison said, as quietly as she could. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked Bill Hutchison with one quick glance around at his wife and children and nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy who came willingly with him up to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand into the box and laughed. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while little Dave stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly. Nancy next, Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, near knocked the box over as he got a paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, and then went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. Bill, Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchison reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with a slip of paper in it. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, I hope it's not Nancy, and the sound of the whisper reached the edges of the crowd. It's not the way it used to be, Old Man Warner said clearly. People ain't the way they used to be. All right, Mr. Summers said. Open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and there was a general sigh through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see that it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed, turning around to the crowd and holding their slips of paper over their heads. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchison, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. Show us her paper, Bill. Bill Hutchison went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it. The black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with the heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchison held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said, let's finish quickly. Although the visitors had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier today was ready. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, she said, hurry up. Mr. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead. I'll catch up with you. The children had stones already, and somebody even gave little Davy Hutchison a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchison was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she said, as a stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. It isn't fair. It isn't right, Mrs. Hutchison screamed, and then they were upon her.
Excellent. Thanks for performing that. And your voice sounded so pleasant as you were performing that, but that story is nothing. It's not at all. Isn't pleasant at all. So
No.
thanks for performing that. So did you have something else for us tonight, or was that it?
That was it.
All right. Thank you. So up next we have a familiar face if you're local to the Tuscaloosa area. We have Mark Hughes Cobb.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
So what are you performing for us today, Mark?
A couple of short stories by a guy named Neil Gaiman. He's a contemporary writer. They have a little something in common.
Some guy named Neil Gaiman, you know.
Some guy. Yeah, you might recognize the name.
But yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Excellent. These are two short stories by Neil Gaiman. I heard him read one of these, the other one I just read, but they're kind of linked. I think you'll get why. The first one's called Don't Ask Jack. Nobody knew where the toy had come from, which great-grandparent or distant aunt had owned it before it was given to the nursery. It was a box carved and painted in gold and red. It was undoubtedly attractive and, or so the grown-ups maintained, quite valuable, perhaps even an antique. The latch, unfortunately, was rusted shut and the key had been lost, so the Jack could not be released from his box. Still, it was a remarkable box, heavy and carved and gilt. Children did not play with it. Sat at the bottom of the old wooden toy box, which was the same size and age as a pirate's treasure chest, or so the children thought. The Jack in the Box was buried beneath dolls and trains, clowns and paper stars, and old conjuring tricks, and crippled marionettes with their strings irrevocably tangled, with dressing-up clothes, here the tatters of a long-ago wedding dress, there a black silk hat crusted with age and time, and costume jewelry, broken hoops and tops and hobby horses. Under them all was the Jack's box. The children did not play with it. They whispered among themselves alone in the attic nursery. On gray days when the wind howled about the house and rain rattled the slates and pattered down the eaves, they told each other stories about Jack, although they had never seen him. One claimed that Jack was an evil wizard placed in the box as punishment for crimes too awful to describe. Another maintained that he had been placed in the box as guardian to prevent the bad things inside it from coming out. They would not even touch the box if they could help it, although when, as happened from time to time, an adult would comment on the absence of that sweet old Jack in the Box and retrieve it from the chest and place it in a position of honor on the mantelpiece, then the children would pluck up their courage and later hide it away once more in the darkness. The children did not play with the Jack in the Box, and when they grew up and left the great house, the attic nursery was closed up and almost forgotten. Almost, but not entirely. For each of the children separately remembered walking alone in the moon's blue light on his or her own bare feet up to the nursery. It was almost like sleepwalking, feet feet soundless on the wood of the stairs, on the threadbare nursery carpet. Remembered opening the treasure chest, pawing through the dolls and the clothes and pulling out the box. And then the child would touch the catch and the lid would open, slow as the sun set, and the music would begin to play, and Jack came out. Not with a pop and a bounce, but deliberately, intently. He would rise from the box and motion to the child to come closer, closer, and smile. And there in the moonlight, he told them each things they could never quite remember, things they were never able entirely to forget. The oldest boy died in the Great War. The youngest, after their parents died, inherited the house, although it was taken from him when he was found in the cellar one night with cloths and paraffin and matches, trying to burn the great house to the ground. They took him to the madhouse, and perhaps he is there still. The other children, who had once been girls and now were women, declined, each and every one, to return to the house in which they had grown up. And the windows of the house were boarded up, and the doors were all locked with the huge iron keys. Years have passed, and the girls are old women, and owls and bats have made their homes in the old attic nursery. Rats build their nests among the forgotten toys. The creatures gaze uncuriously at the faded prints on the wall and stain the remnants of the carpet with their droppings. And deep within the box, Jack waits and smiles, holding his secrets. He is waiting for the children. He can wait forever. The second story is called Click-Clack, the Rattlebag, and it will explain itself. I'm not going to try to explain that one. Before you take me up to bed, will you tell me a story? Do you actually need me to take you up to bed? I asked the boy. He thought for a moment, then with intense seriousness, yes, actually, I think you do. It's because I finished my homework, and so it's my bedtime, and I am a bit scared. Not very scared, just a bit. But it is a very big house, and lots of times the lights don't work, and it's sort of dark. Reached over and tousled his hair. I can understand that, I said. It is a very big old house. He nodded. We were in the kitchen where it was light and warm. I put down my magazine on the kitchen table. What kind of story would you like me to tell you? Well, he said thoughtfully, I don't think it should be too scary, because then when I go up to bed, I will just be thinking about monsters the whole time. But if it isn't just a little bit scary, then I won't be interested. And you make up scary stories, don't you? I know she says that's what you do. She exaggerates. I write stories, yes. Nothing has been published yet, though. And I write lots of different kinds of stories. But you do write scary stories. Yes. The boy looked up at me from the shadows by the door where he was waiting. Do you know any stories about Click-Clack the Rattlebag? I don't think so. Those are the best sorts of stories. Do they tell them at your school? He shrugged. Sometimes. What's a Click-Clack the Rattlebag story? He was a precocious child and was unimpressed by his sister's boyfriend's ignorance. You could see it on his face. Everybody knows them. I don't, I said, trying not to smile. He looked at me as if he was trying to decide whether or not I was pulling his leg. He said, I think maybe you should take me up to my bedroom, and then you can tell me a story before I go to sleep, but a very not scary story, because I'll be up in my bedroom then, and it's actually a bit dark up there, too. I said, shall I leave a note for your sister, telling her where we are? You can, but you'll hear when they get back. The front door is very slammy. We walked out of the warm and cozy kitchen into the hallway of the big house, where it was chilly and drafty and dark. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb's gone, the boy said. That always happens. Our eyes adjusted to the shadows. The moon was almost full, and blue-white moonlight shone in through the high windows in the staircase, down into the hall. We'll be all right, I said. Yes, said the boy soberly. I am very glad you're here. Seemed less precocious now. His hand found mine, and he held on to my fingers comfortably, trustingly, as if he'd known me all his life. I felt responsible and adult. I did not know if the feeling I had for his sister, who was my girlfriend, was love, not yet, but I liked that the child treated me as one of the family. I felt like his big brother, and I stood taller, and if there was something unsettling about the empty house, I would not have admitted it for worlds. The stairs creaked beneath the threadbare stair carpet. Click-Clacks, said the boy, are the best monsters ever. Are they from television? I don't think so. I don't think any people know where they come from. Mostly, they come from the dark. Good place for a monster to come. Yes. We walked along the upper corridor in the shadows, walking from patch of moonlight to patch of moonlight. It really was a big house. I wished I had a flashlight. They come from the dark, said the boy, holding on to my hand. I think probably they're made of dark. And they come in when you don't pay attention. That's when they come in. And then they take you back to their, not nests. What's a word that's like nests, but not? House? No, it's not a house. Lair? He was silent. Then, I think that's the word, yes, lair. He squeezed my hand. He stopped talking. Right, so they take the people who don't pay attention back to their lair. And what do they do then, your monster? So they suck all the blood out of you like vampires? He snorted. Vampires don't suck all the blood out of you. They only drink a little bit just to keep them going and, flying around. Click-Clacks are much scarier than vampires. I'm not scared of vampires, I told him. Me neither. I'm not scared of vampires either. Do you want to know what Click-Clacks do? They drink you, said the boy. Like a Coke? Coke is very bad for you, said the boy. If you put a tooth in Coke in the morning, it will be dissolved into nothing. That's how bad Coke is for you, and why you must always clean your teeth every night. I'd heard the Coke story as a boy and had been told as an adult that it wasn't true, but was certain that a lie which promoted dental hygiene was a good lie, and I let it pass. Click-Clacks drink you, said the boy. First they bite you, and then you go all ishy inside. And all your meat and all your brains and everything except your bones and your skin turns into a wet, milkshakey stuff, and then the Click-Clack sucks it out through the holes where your eyes used to be. That's disgusting, I told him. Did you make it up? We'd reached the last flight of stairs all the way into the big house. No. I can't believe you kids make up stuff like that. You didn't ask me about the Rattlebag, he said. Right. What's the Rattlebag? Well, he said sagely, soberly, a small voice from the darkness beside me. Once you're just bones and skin, they hang you up on a hook and you rattle in the wind. So what do these Click-Clacks look like? Even as I asked them, I wished I could take the question back and leave it unasked. I thought, huge spidery creatures like the one in the shower that morning. I'm afraid of spiders. I was relieved when the boy said, they look like what you aren't expecting, what you aren't paying attention to. We were climbing wooden steps now. I held onto the railing on my left, held his hand with my right, and as he walked beside me, it smelled like dust and old wood that high in the house. The boy's tread was certain, though, even though the moonlight was scarce. Do you know what story you're going to tell me to put me to bed? He asked. It doesn't actually have to be scary. Not really. Maybe you could tell me about this evening. Tell me what you did. That won't make much of a story for you. My girlfriend just moved into a new place on the edge of town. She inherited it from an aunt or someone. It's very big and very old. I'm going to spend my first night with her tonight, so I've been waiting for an hour or so for her and her housemates to come back with the wine and an Indian takeaway. See, said the boy. There was that precocious amusement again, but all kids can be insufferable sometimes when they think they know something you don't. It's probably good for them. You know all that, but you don't think. You just let your brain fill in the gaps. I pushed open the door to the attic room. It was perfectly dark now, but the open door disturbed the air, and I heard things rattle gently like dry bones and thin bags in a slight wind. Click, clack, click, clack, like that. I would have pulled away then if I could, but small, firm fingers pulled me forward, unrelentingly, into the dark. Boom.
Thanks for that great performance, Mark. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Ron.
All right.
Atmosphere courtesy of a fire pit.
Yes, the ambiance was great. So
Yeah, Sand Mountain and me in the fire. Can you get the moon in the background too? I was trying to get the full moon in the background. It just, yeah. We can't have everything, can we?
Right.
Thank you so much, Ron. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Take care.
All right. So up next we have Jim Ezell. So I am going to get one little thing ready for him, but as I do that, give me just 1 second. That's not what I meant to do, Jim. How's it going?
It's cold night.
It is a cold night. So
yes, it is.
What I'll do now is I'll allow you to tell your.
I just lost him. I just lost Ron.
Are you on?
Oh yeah, I'm still here, Jim. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's go back, everybody. Let's imagine it's the year 1898, and it's the Alaska Gold Rush. And oh gosh, it's cold. It's so cold. I have a story to tell you. There's strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he often said in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On Christmas Day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold through the Parker's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd closed and the lashes froze till sometimes we couldn't see, it wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me, and Cap, says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess, and if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of a moan, it's cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains, so I want you to swear that fair or foul you'll cremate my last remains. A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail, and we started on at the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee, and before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate these last remains. Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that thing. And every day, the quiet clay seemed too heavy and heavier grow, and on I went, though the dogs were spent, and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad, and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in, and I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a thrice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then, here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside. I guess he cooked, and as time I looked, then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Peachtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warned. There's strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge, I cremated Sam McGee.
So thanks for reading that, Jim. Also, thanks for the reminder that starting Sunday we'll start hearing Christmas music. So thank you.
That's right. That's right. Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas and Happy Halloween. But up next we have Deborah, and I will bring her on. Give me just 1 second. Hello, Deborah. What will you be reading for us today?
I'll be reading H.P. Lovecraft's The Cats of Ulthar. He's, of course, one of the masters of early horror fiction.
What an excellent choice. So take us away.
Okay. It is said that in Ulthar, which lies beyond the river Sky, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe as I gaze upon him who sitteth purring before the fire. For the cat is cryptic, and close to strange things which men cannot see. He is the soul of antique Egyptus, and bearer of tales from forgotten cities in Meroe and Ophir. He is the kin of the jungle lords and heir to the secrets of Africa. The Sphinx is his cousin, and the cat speaks her language. But he is more ancient than the Sphinx, and remembers that which she hath forgotten. In Ulthar, before ever the burgesses forbade the killing of cats, there dwelt an old cotter and his wife who delighted to trap and slay the cats of their neighbors. Why they did this, I know not, save that many hate the voice of the cat in the night, and take it that all cats that run stealthily about yards and gardens at twilight are an ill. But whatever the reason, this old man and woman took pleasure in trapping and slaying every cat that came near their hovel. And from some of the sounds heard after dark, many villagers fancied that the manner of slaying was exceedingly peculiar. But the villagers did not discuss such things with the old man and his wife because of the habitual expression on the withered faces of the two, and because their cottage was so small and so darkly hidden under spreading oaks at the back of a neglected yard. In truth, as much as the owners of cats hated these odd folk, they feared them more. And instead of berating them as brutal assassins, merely took care that no cherished pet or mouser should stray towards the remote hovel under the dark trees. When, through some unavoidable oversight, a cat was missed and sounds heard after dark, the loser would lament impotently or console himself by thanking fate that it was not one of his children who had thus vanished. For the people of Ulthar were simple and knew not whence it is that all cats first came. One day a caravan of strange wanderers from the south entered the narrow cobbled streets of Ulthar. Wanderers they were, and unlike the other roving folk who passed through the village twice each year, in the marketplace they told fortunes for silver. What was the land of these wanderers? None could tell. But it was seen that they were given to strange prayers, and that they had painted on the sides of their wagons strange figures with human bodies and the heads of cats, hawks, rams, and lions. And the leader of the caravan wore a headdress with two horns and a curious disc between the horns. There was in this singular caravan a little boy with no father or mother, but only a tiny black kitten to cherish. The plague had not been kind to him, yet had left him this small furry thing to mitigate his sorrow. And when one is very young, one can find great relief in the lively antics of a black kitten. So the boy, whom the wanderers called Menes, smiled more often than he wept as he sat playing with his graceful kitten on the steps of an oddly painted wagon. On the third morning of the wanderer's stay in Ulthar, Menes could not find his kitten. And as he sobbed aloud in the marketplace, certain villagers told him of the old man and his wife and of sounds heard in the night. And when he heard these things, his sobbing gave place to meditation and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms towards the sun and prayed in a tongue no villager could understand. Indeed, the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the little boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous figures of exotic things, of hybrid creatures crowned with horn-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. That night the wanderers left Ulthar and were never seen again. And the householders were troubled when they noticed that in all the village there was not a cat to be found. From each hearth the familiar cat had vanished. Cats large and small, black, gray, striped, yellow, and white. Old Crannan, the burgomaster, swore that the wanderers had taken the cats away in revenge for the killing of Menes' kitten and cursed the caravan and the little boy. But Nith, the lean notary, declared that the old cotter and his wife were far more likely persons to suspect, for their hatred of cats was notorious and increasingly bold. Still, no one durst complain to the sinister couple, even when little Attal, the innkeeper's son, vowed that he had at twilight seen all the cats of Ulthar in that accursed yard under the trees. pacing very slowly and solemnly in a circle around the cottage, two abreast, as if in performance of some unheard of rite of beasts. The villagers did not know how much to believe from so small a boy, and though they feared that the evil pair had charmed the cats to their death, they preferred not to chide the old cotter until they met him outside his dark and repellent yard. So Ulthar went to sleep in vain anger, and when the people awakened at dawn, behold, every cat was back at his accustomed hearth, large and small, black, gray, striped, yellow and white, none was missing. Very sleek and fat did the cats appear, and sonorous with purring content. The citizens talked with one another of the fair, and marveled not a little. Old Cranon again insisted that it was the wanderers who had taken them, since cats did not return alive from the cottage of the ancient man and his wife. But all agreed on one thing, that the refusal of all the cats to eat their portions of meat or drink their saucers of milk was exceedingly curious. And for 2 days, the sleek, lazy cats of Ulthar would touch no food, but only doze by the fire or in the sun. It was fully a week before the villagers noticed that no lights were appearing at dusk in the windows of the cottage under the trees. Then the lean Nith remarked that no one had seen the old man or his wife since the night the cats went away. In another week, the burgomaster decided to overcome his fears and call at the strangely silent dwelling as a matter of duty, though in doing so he was careful to take with him Shang the blacksmith and Thol the cutter of stone as witnesses. And when they had broken down the frail door, they found only this: 2 cleanly picked human skeletons on the earthen floor, and a number of singular beetles crawling in the shadowy corners. There was subsequently much talk among the burgomasters of Ulthar. Zack the coroner disputed at length with Nith the lean notary, and Cranon and Shang and Thol were overwhelmed with questions. Even little Attel, the innkeeper's son, was closely questioned and given a candy as a reward. They talked of the old cotter and his wife, of the caravan of wanderers, of small Menes and his black kitten, of the prayer of Menes, and of the sky during that prayer, of the doings of the cats on the night the caravan left, and what was later found in the cottage under the dark trees in the repellent yard. And in the end, the burgesses passed that remarkable law which is told of by traders in Hathig and discussed by travelers in Near, namely, that in Ulthar no man may kill a cat.
Deborah, thank you for that wonderful performance.
You're welcome.
All right. Up next, we have Carol Ezell. So let me bring her to the screen. And wait, this can't be right. I was expecting Carol Ezell.
Hey, Ron.
So what will you be reading for us today?
Okay, so I'm going to read Devil's Cap, which was actually written with gratitude for the Tuscaloosa Public Library. Copyright 2020 by Carolyn Breckenridge.
All right.
Okay, Devil's Cap. The blood between Sonny Miller and his brother Junior was fermented. As toxic, some said, as Witch's Wart Creek that flowed right alongside the downtown area of Devil's Cap, Alabama. Folks who lived in our little town knew this, that there was no way Devil's Cap could safely accommodate the both of them. Henry Lewis said it was like putting a pair of tomcats in a burlap sack during mating season. Their mama, Eloise Ruth, swore the rivalry began in her womb. She claimed they knocked each other sideways while she was walking down the street, twins duking it out, trying to choke one another with umbilical cords. Being a skeptic and knowing how people can exaggerate, I didn't believe a word of this. But old Doc McMullen told me to Google it if I didn't believe twins punch and kick and shove each other before they're even born. Mrs. Janie Pritchett, our mail lady, said if there were another woman who looked and talked exactly like her in Devil's Cap, she'd be mean as a rattlesnake too. But it was no secret, she'd been sweet on Junior since high school and would take up for him in a heartbeat. Not that Junior gave a flip about her. He'd always been a loner, far back as I can remember. Just give him his hole-in-the-wall funeral home, a few dead bodies, and his maroon 1969 Buick Sport Wagon that he'd reconfigured into a hearse, and he was one happy man. Never seen anyone as content to keep company with only the dead and me. Yep, Junior never seemed to mind my hanging out around his place. Didn't seem to mind a bit. I appreciated that, given I'd been in and out of prison a time or two, and most of the townsfolk crossed the street to avoid me. That's excepting Miss Portia Badmore and Miss Dahlia Greeley, both town gossips. They loved to stop and chat with me, searching for what some might call conversational nuances, talkable tidbits. And they didn't spare attention to Sonny and Junior neither, always going on about which one did what to the other. But in fairness, who didn't wonder what would happen next? Once Junior shot the last joint of Sonny's toe flat off after they got to arguing about whether leather sandals were sissified. And there was the time Sonny poured isopropyl alcohol into Junior's gin and tonic when he didn't like his brother's jukebox choice down at Eddie's Bar and Grill. Sheriff Abbott, who'd handcuffed me a time or two, told Sonny and Junior until he was red in the face, "One of you boys better move on out. Go set up business down the road a spell. Fact is, one of you is going to wind up dead and the other is going to be staring at the world from a prison cell." He called them the sorriest pair of brothers he'd ever seen. And even though I'm not a fan of the sheriff, I had to agree that in some ways he was right. The way those two boys tossed threats, killing each other back and forth, Preacher Holson stayed in a perpetual prayer. And me, I wouldn't admit it to just anybody, but they were my primary source of entertainment, better than any reality show on TV. It did seem inevitable one would take things a step too far or misstep with the same result, and there they'd be, one laying cold and moldering in the ground. So anticlimactic doesn't begin to describe Sonny dropping deader than a doornail while stocking his store last Tuesday morning. He fell nose first into the parsnips and carrots, Miss Portia reported, and Miss Darque added that the worst was the stalk of celery that rammed up inside his left nostril. Sheriff Abbott walked the 3 blocks down Main Street to unroll yellow police tape across the front door of Sonny's grocery. Doc McMullen verified old Sonny's ticker had been going bad for years, but the sheriff was having none of it. He called up his hunting buddy, Amos Walker, who lives in Bug Tussle, a ways away from Devil's Cap. Seems Amos had been a county coroner at one time or another, and he agreed to pick up poor old Sonny's body and check it for cat poisoning, rat poisoning, and the likes. Ain't no sense in all that, Sheriff, Junior argued. Nobody'd waste good rat poisoning on my sorry brother, and besides which, you're upsetting my mama. Junior, Sheriff said, the good Lord only knows what you've done. You stay a football field away from that body until after my friend gets through with him, you hear? I'll let you know when you can go pick him up in that fancified purple hearse of yours. And so it was that I found myself riding beside Junior in his Buick Sport Wagon as he headed toward Bug Tussle to claim his brother's body. Sheriff's hunting buddy hadn't found any hint of poisoning or any other foul play, and agreed with Doc McMullen that Sonny's heart caused his plunge into the vegetables. The hearse drove smooth down the road, and I'd never seen Junior more ebullient. Fool said he'd see me dead, he crowed, said he'd put me face down in my casket, if he buried me at all. Threatened one time to leave me on the hilltop for the coyotes and crows. Yes, sir, he did. It was a long drive to Bug Tussle, where the story went, a drunk once laid in the dirt and watched a dung beetle tussling around with some cow mess or something, and my ears were growing weary and my eyelids heavy. Can't say I didn't used to get scared sometimes, Junior prattled, thinking of ways Sonny might do me in, fearing for my very life. To be honest with you, he was a mighty powerful man. Yes, sir, he was. In some ways, I nearly believed him, that he'd see me dead, that he'd not leave the earth until I was a goner. I thought for a minute about how Junior didn't need much help in dying, the way he ignored his cholesterol and smoked like a steam engine and didn't wear seatbelts and liked to guzzle moonshine. You said the same about him, I offered. How you'd nail him in a coffin packed with fire ants. Junior laughed. Reckon I meant it, too. Got a few hills of 'em just waiting. He chuckled more to himself than otherwise. Got all sorts of plans for his body. Old Sonny and I are gonna have a party. Well, my lids kept getting heavier and my mind wearier, and I didn't have the heart to listen to all Junior's drivel on such a sunny, warm, easygoing, late afternoon. Hey, man, I said, how about you pull onto the shoulder and let me climb into the back and catch a little shut-eye? Truth is, I could stand to stretch out and rest my bones a bit. Junior knew I had arthritis, but he didn't seem none too happy to oblige. Sure, he said, if that's the way you want to be. But didn't you agree to ride to keep me company? Still, he slowed the vehicle and pulled to the side and popped the back latch, and I got out, crawled in, and was asleep before we passed the next white mile marker. I woke up confused. It was as black as my Labrador Retriever midnight. My body was practically immobile, crammed between wood and upholstery. I was moving, and the ride was smooth. Gospel music played loud and sweet from somewhere near. It was when I heard Junior singing, I realized I'd slept through the corpse pickup. I was stretched out head to head with Sonny, all except Sonny was in a box, and I was not. I ran my hand against the smooth wood, thinking how much I liked the dead man, how he'd let me pop grapes in my mouth in the fruit section and didn't mind a bit when my pockets ran dry. Just pay me when you can, brother, he'd say. Funny how he called everybody brother except for his real one, the one he threatened to see dead before he left the earth. But Junior'd had the last laugh. Sonny'd run out of opportunities. How great thou art! Junior karaoke'd along with the radio from the front seat. He had a god-awful voice, like a bobcat screaming at dusk. You're killing me, I bellowed from the back. I think I heard a gasp, but I can't swear to it. Then cursing and a scream. I felt the car swerve, fishtail hit the shoulder. The brakes caught, the tires stung gravel, then bounced onto dirt. The hearse plummeted, down, down. Old Sonny and I went airborne. I braced against the seat back, holding on for dear life as my stomach tumbled, jumbled. The Buick flipped, over and over, rolling like a barrel down a bumpy hill. Junior moaned. The gospel music played, while outside trees and bushes scratched squeals out of the metal. It felt like a century before the hearse jolted to a stop, horn now blaring through the dead of night. Junior, I called, while I moved my body parts, searching for breaks and sprains and cut arteries. Junior, buddy? No answer. The horn, radio static. We had landed upside down. I reached to my side and searched for the light switch. Dull yellow light filled the vehicle. It wasn't easy, but I scooted into a sitting position. I could tell it right away. Junior was dead. There was blood everywhere. Sonny's casket lay snugly on top of his brother's bashed-in skull. It was not a pretty sight. Junior looked like he'd gotten himself tangled up between one of them 380-pound feral hogs and her babies. I hadn't given it much thought until that very moment. It hit me while I sat staring at the two of them, ginned up as tight in death as they'd been in Miss Eloise Ruth's womb. There was nothing left for me but reality TV. Thank you.
Thanks for performing that. And once again, I just want to give you compliments on the great beard. It's an amazing beard. So
Thanks, Ron.
so thanks for reading that. So up next, we have a pretty special performance. We actually have two performers performing at the same time. So first, we'll bring on Matheson Byers, the Dark Bard, and then we'll bring on Carolyn Rhodes. How are you two doing today?
Fantastic.
Hello. We're doing very well tonight.
All right, so I'll get out your way and you can get started.
This is How the Witch Stole Yuletide. Every Dane down in Daneland like Yuletide a bunch, but the witch off the mainland to give you a hunch. So despise Yuletide splendor, the whole Yuletide feel. Now just don't ask me why, no one quite knows her deal. It could be noises from peace each night. It could be her leathery boots fit too tight. But believe me, whatever the reason might be, you might say Grendel's mother drew hatred from glee. No matter her purpose, no rhyme for her pains, she plotted on Yuletide Eve, loathing the Danes. Sending out from her waters to lend her a hand, came her beastly son Grendel, who crept through the land. For she knew every Dane down in Daneland below was now actively kissing beneath mistletoe.
And they're drinking their spiced ale.
She grumbled with grit.
Tomorrow is Yuletide. I must make it quit.
Then she thought about Grendel, who she had sent slumming.
Perhaps he and I can keep Yuletide from coming. Mm-hmm.
In the morning she knew every Dane wall to wall would arise bright and early in King Hrothgar's hall, and then, oh the din. That's one thing she hated, the din. Then the Danes young and old would gather and dine, and they dine and they dine and they dine. They would dine on their beef, cheese, and drink nude or clothed. And you know, this the witch did not like, no, she loathed. And then they did something she loathed most of all. Every Dane down in Daneland, the small and the tall, would lean in together with ale mugs a-clinging. They'd raise a glass high and the Danes would start singing. They'd croon and they'd croon and they'd croon. And the more the witch thought of the Danes' Yuletide tune, the more the witch thought,
it will end with my goon. Why? For hundreds of years I've endured this vile day. I'll stop this year's Yuletide. I'll have my own way.
Then she got a notion, a horrible notion. The witch got a wretched and horrible notion.
I now have just the plan.
The witch started to gloat, and she sent up a spell through the muck and the moat, and she cackled and laughed.
This will aid Grendel's case. With those words I shall change him to have Odin's face. All he needs is a slave's near horse.
The witch glanced aware that since horses were tasty, she would find none there. Did this halt the old witch? Nay, the witch simply spoke.
If there aren't any horses, I will craft
protect one from smoke.
So she called on the dragon. Its scales were all red, and she conjured 8 legs and a rein for its head. She filled up some sacks on an old rotting wagon and tethered them tightly around her pet dragon. Then the witch said,
Get going!
The wagon would crawl to the Danes down in Daneland, asleep in their hall. Here the dragon met Grendel. The scene was all set. All the Danes were all snoring without any fret. When he entered the hall, he would bring them regret. Here we are at our stop, the false Allfather jeered, and he moved to the roof, knowing he would be feared. Then he found a slat open, a hiccuping glitch, but he squeezed in and it didn't bother him, thanks to the witch. He maneuvered down slowly and made it alone. Then he pushed through head first there upon the hearthstone, where the tiny Dane spits all turned round from below. These ball spits, he sneered, I will eat nice and slow. Then he changed up his shape, and he ate some roast pheasant, and he silently slinked, munching on thane and peasant. Small ones and tall ones and plump ones as well. Skinny ones, many ones, none gave a yell. And he crammed them in sacks, then he pushed them up duly, crammed them all in the sacks, and the hearth opened newly. Then he sneaked to the next pile. He took the Danes there. He took all the bad ones. He took those with hair. He snatched up those sleeping in quite a mad dash. Why, then Grendel decided he'd mince and he'd smash. Then he crammed all the Danes up the hole with a grin. And next, Grendel smirked, I will cram up more men. And he snatched up more men, and he started to fill. When he caught a light laugh, ha ha ha, someone else he would kill. He shifted his gaze, and it fell on a man. Tiny Beowulf standing to thwart the fiend's plan. Grendel Odin was found by this Gaetlin's son, who feigned to be sleeping while vile deeds were done. He glared hard at Grendel and said, Odin, stop! Stop all this snatching the men. Here, now stop. But you see, Grendel Odin had quick-witted guile. He told quite a story. He spoke with a smile. Why, my wee tiny man, Grendel Odin there said, these poor men need my magic, but they are not dead. So I'm bringing them home to my cavern, you see. I'll make them brand new. That's a promise from me. But his lie didn't work. Then the man gave him fight, and the two had a tussle that long winter night. Then when Beowulf finished, he held up an arm, and Grendel was bleeding and fled fast in harm. He lost his false face and climbed higher and higher. Then he went through the open hearth, singed by the fire. On the roof he went screaming back home through the mire. And though many a Dane was left dead on the floor, brave Beowulf had stopped him from killing some more. Then he raced on the wagon all across forest floors, exiting with the dragon who took him through the moors. It was just getting light, all the Danes yet to wake, all the Danes still asleep, or those he didn't take. In his wagon crammed tightly, the bodies, the feeding, the pain in his shoulder, the horror, the bleeding. 200 feet down to his mother's cavern, he pushed with the dragon beyond the hall's tavern. Harumph! To the Danes he let out to his mother. I messed up their Yuletide, you soon will discover. They'll all arise soon. Mother, now I must die. Their hearts have been broken. I gave my best try. Then the Danes down in Daneland will let out a cry.
That's a sound that I need in my ears.
Grendel died, and the witch listened out for their jeers. And she did hear a noise rising out of the hall. It came as a hoot. Then it bounced wall to wall. but the sound wasn't sorrowful. Why, how could this be? It drove the witch madder, the foul joy, the glee. She listened to Damon. The witch let a yell. Then she screamed. Her son Grindel had given them hell. Every dame down in Daneland, the small and the tall, was crooning and toasting, alive in the hall. He had it made Yuletime stop. It still arrived. Those dames celebrated, those who survived, and the witch with her dragon beneath her cool lake grew angrier.
This is just too much to take. It came without roast boar. It came without bread. It came still the same, although many are dead.
And she wondered for hours, till she wondered no more. The witch thought she simply must even the score.
Yuletide,
She pondered.
I will break down the door. This Yuletide, all Daneland will be smattered in gore.
And what happened next? Well, in Daneland they tell that the witch's full wrath came among them to dwell, and the moment her hands tore through wood to get in, she ripped up their bodies and shredded their skin. Of the Danes she brought back, Hrothgar trembled in dread. She took his advisor and ripped off his head.
All right, thanks for that. So I think that combines a lot of things people love, which is Beowulf and Yuletide, told in a very interesting way from great two performers. So thanks for performing that, Matt and Carolyn. Thank you both. All right, so we have one final performance of the night. If you noticed, we started with some Poe, and I think it's only right that we end with another Edgar Allan Poe story. So, our last performer, Bob Lipman. Bob, how are you doing?
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to recite Edgar Allan's classic 1845 poem, what he is most identified with, perhaps, The Raven, a trip into near insanity as a result of the loss of his love, Lenore. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more. Distinctly, I remember it. It was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly, I wished the morrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating, then no longer. "Sir," said I, or madam, truly, your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping, and so faintly you came tapping, and so gently you came rapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the stillness was unbroken, and the silence gave no token. And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and the echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Only this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard that tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Oh, let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. No, 'tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here, I flung the shutter. When, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped the stately raven of the ancient days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, Art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled, this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast above his chamber door with such name as nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the pallid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul within that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Oh, startled by the stillness broken, by reply so aptly spoken, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then I took myself to linking fancy unto fancy thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining on the cushion's velvet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, that she shall press, oh no, never more. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed by an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee by these angels, he hath sent thee respite and nepenthe from the memories of Lenore. So quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget the lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted. On this desert land enchanted, but on this home of horror haunted. Tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me truly, I implore. Oh, quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Oh, quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend. I shrieked up, starting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, and quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted. Nevermore. Thank you.
Bob, what an amazing performance. Seriously, I would like to thank you for that. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Also, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. Like I said, we put this together last minute, so thanks to all the performers. Thanks to the Root Mechanicals and Twig. But I want to thank everyone individually. So that means Patricia, Wes, TK, Exa, Mark, Jim, Deborah, Carolyn, Matt Byers, Carolyn Rhodes, Bob, and also Stephanie. So thanks to everyone for performing, and like I said, thanks for watching. But um, if you enjoyed this performance today and you want to support the Tuscaloosa Public Library, there is a way that you can do so. So you can visit our foundation website, which is tplfund.org. So if you enjoy this program and the many other programs that we bring to you, and you feel so inclined to donate, that's how you may do so. That's all we have tonight. So once again, I would like to thank the Root Mechanicals and Twig for assisting with this program. Enjoy the rest of your night, and good night.